Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is In Case You Missed It by Kates-Boylston for the week ending Friday, March 21st, 2025. We got so much cool stuff coming up for you in this episode. I actually have even a personal story. But before that, we are going to hear from our sponsor, Starmark.
Funeral service is more than a profession. It's a calling. Starmark understands the care, dignity, and efficiency you need to provide for the families you serve. That's why we specialize in sensible product solutions designed to meet your needs. If you're looking for sustainable, economical, and efficient container and casket solutions, Starmark is here to support you. Because presentation means everything, you deserve a partner you can trust. Starmark, the cremation solutions leader. Visit starmarkcp.com today and discover the difference.
First up this week, we took our dog here at the Russo house for her last vet visit earlier this week. And I had my first experience with looking for a funeral home to handle the remains, and I was so conscious of which funeral homes had their prices listed. And my wife was, we were going to have the dog cremated. There wasn't a question about that. Pepper was a big dog, and the idea of bringing her home and burying her, as we'd done with our previous dogs who were smaller, was just really kind of out of the question. So my wife wanted to get a sense of what it would cost just because she wanted to know. And the local pet crematories don't have their prices listed, which I was surprised about. But one funeral home did have its prices listed, and I want to shout them out for two reasons. The first one is I know they listen. So hello to the folks at Holloway Funeral Home, and thank you so much for making sure your prices were listed for pet cremation. As it turned out, skip to the end, the veterinarian's office provides its own service. It's through some sort of, I don't know if it's a direct cremation firm. I didn't ask. I wasn't on the clock. But it was one that wasn't listed, and that was also really interesting. So the company that they use wasn't one of the companies that came up as one of my options. So I don't know if I'm not going to shout it out because I don't know what it is. But I don't know if it was like an alternate name for some of the ones that I couldn't find prices on or what. But there is not a link to this in the show notes. So I figured I'd start off with it. And now we'll get into the rest of the actual news for the week. It's kind of breaking social media news, I guess. A gentleman who I've not met yet by the name of Ryan Reyes from Dignity Solutions was lauded for his efforts of getting funeral service listed as an industry on LinkedIn. I guess it's very, very cool to have another. I mean, it's always frustrating. I mean, when I fill out anything, it's always, I go to where writer, it's always other. It's very rarely. I've almost been other for most of my career. So it's cool to not be other, or to be in like someplace between, healthcare services and hospitality services or whatever. I don't know what funeral directors put down before, but now you can put down funeral industry as the industry that you're in. And I think that's pretty cool. And I think it's awesome that there was kind of this letter writing campaign. I've reached out to Mr. Reyes. Hopefully I'll have some more background for you in a story in Funeral Service Insider very soon. But for now, there's a link to the announcement in the show notes. I think I mentioned this last week, but in case I didn't, or in case you missed it, I have a cool story out in the most recent edition of Funeral Service Insider. It is called Letting the Old Ways Die, an academic look at alternative dispositions. And it's my reporting on a kind of really interesting publication that came out from Wake Forest Law, the Wake Forest Law Review, in November of 2024. And there were a bunch of really great essays, reports, and studies of surrounding how death care is changing there are many articles that were co-authored by people you've heard of, with students at Wake Forest Law. And it's just a treasure trove of really good insights, ideas, and conversations that we should be having if we're not already having them. I have a link to that in the show notes because that is provided by Wake Forest Law, and they've decided to put it in front of their paywall. So you can have all of that for free if you click on the show notes, and I can't recommend you do so highly enough. The story that I wrote is mainly focused on a study by Tanya Marsh and a co-author called Letting the Old Ways Die. And it's a look at the rise of greenish dispositions. And it's the first academic survey about consumer preferences surrounding disposition. It's something that she said that she intends to do for the foreseeable future. So every year, hopefully not only will it expand, but it will provide more drilled downable data. She joked, actually, she said, anecdotally, this is what we think, and anecdotally, this is what happens to me. But one of the reasons we did this report is that that's all we've really been kind of, using. And I think the really interesting thing that came out for me was last year, there was a report that said, that Generation Z is more interested in being buried than any of the previous generations. And that it just feels wrong to me. Not wrong, like morally wrong, but it feels like some of the numbers were off. And that's when we were talking about the anecdotal aspect. And she said, well, it also felt wrong to her because, anecdotally, once her students find out about alternative dispositions, those are the ones they're interested in. But the survey data doesn't bear that out. And the really interesting part of that is what if, she suggests, what if it's not generational so much as by age group? So she's very interested, and I think we're all very interested, even though many of us, I certainly won't be around to see it. What will happen when Gen Z is in their 60s and 70s? Will they start to fit into the demographic preferences that are currently occupied by the boomers? Like, is it an age thing or is it a generational thing? Is it cultural or is it just age-based? So that's fun questions, fun to think about. We will find out, if no other way, the hard way, over the next 50-ish years. But until then, there's a link to the story in the show notes. And in addition to the story, there's a link to the law review with all of these stories, which I can't recommend it highly enough. At the risk of getting too commercially, I also hosted a webinar on cemetery software with Brandon Finley of Sims, and that is out now and available, and the link to that is in the show notes. It was a great conversation. We've kind of changed up many of the webinars we do. The webinars are now actually not only more interactive, but I'm on screen the whole time, kind of. Not that you need to see my face anymore if you're watching this on YouTube. You certainly don't. But we make it a more interactive presentation with me asking questions and reacting. So it helps engagement, I think. I think everybody got a kick out of it. I think it was a fantastic presentation. And it is free to watch with just your email to sign up. So there's a link to it in the show notes. And it's worth checking out if you're not familiar with cemetery software, if you're thinking about getting cemetery software, or if it's time to upgrade. This isn't like a sales pitch by him, even though Brandon sells, these systems. It's more of a demonstration of the things that are possible. And, his company obviously offers all of the things that are possible in the presentation, but knowing kind of what to look for and what's out there, especially if you haven't really considered cemetery software recently, it's worth getting into. I know that if I were a cemeterian and I didn't have all of my plots geo-mapped yet, I'd be sweating it. I'd be sweating the cost and I'd be sweating the inconvenience. But really, at this point in history, the thing that's really worth sweating is whether or not your maps match your cemetery. And having it geo mapped is a great way to find out. Anyway, link to that in the show notes. not too long ago, I mentioned a Delaware funeral home that was advertising, that had a feature story done on it by the local paper that said it was offering natural organic reduction. Now, it's legal but not possible in Delaware, as in so many other states. Recently, there was another funeral home that did this in Utah, and I wanted to shout them out. The Starks Funeral Parlor in Mill Creek was featured in their local paper this week for being the first funeral home in the state to offer natural organic reduction. Now, in Utah, it is illegal still to have natural organic reduction, so this was an incongruous headline and very clickable, and all of the things that I mentioned the last time I talked about it. The difference is it's more of a signal that you're offering a wider selection of disposition options. It's not even that important to, just offer natural organic reduction, but to show that you're open to it is worth your while, I think, as a funeral business. Even if it's not legal in your state, it's also worth your while to reach out to one of the several great providers who are doing great work, to see about, having an arrangement. Many, if not most, do have deals that they do with funeral directors, just like outsourcing cremation, except kind of on a larger scale. Now, there's one of the criticisms of natural organic reduction is whatever environmental benefits you believe you're getting from, having your body composted are probably undone by flying your body out there. But again, it's an attitudinal change. We are a funeral home that understands everything that's going on in the industry, and we're promoting that fact. That's, I think, the takeaway more than any of, like I said, the particular services. But link in the show notes. It is absolutely something worth trying out if it is officially spring as this comes out, which means it is time to prepare your funeral home and cemetery, mostly your cemetery, for Memorial Day. There was a really not fun. It was a well-placed, I think, ad by the Sequim Valley Chapel. It was a sponsored story where the chapel talked about its big preparations for Memorial Day. And again, I love the tactical aspect of it. Not only getting, telling everyone to come to the cemetery, check it out. We're getting it ready for Memorial Day. We have stories coming out both in the March edition, if you're a cemetery and cremation, American Cemetery and Cremation subscriber. We also have some stories coming out in April that are about grounds maintenance and certainly worth reading. But it's not too early to start thinking about Memorial Day. I know that you know that operationally, but also promotionally. If you're going to be having a Memorial Day event, it's time to put that bug in people's ears so they have 2 months to prepare for it, because these 2 months are going to be blinding fast. And I already can picture myself saying, can you believe that summer is over? So, heads up, here comes Memorial Day, here comes spring, and here comes like a revitalization of visiting your cemetery. So I hope that you're ready for it. And if you're not, feel free to start getting ready. Link to the story in the show notes. I know I mentioned Memorial Day first, but before we get to Memorial Day, we're going to have to get through Mother's Day. And as you know, Mother's Day can be a busy time in the cemetery. We have a really interesting feature coming out in American Funeral Director about pregnancy loss and how the death care professionals can help people navigate that. And along those lines, there is a cemetery in Northumberland, which is outside of Toronto, where they have a memorial to lost pregnancies that they have a big stone in front of the cemetery, and it's a way for people who might otherwise not have been able to memorialize a lost pregnancy to do so. It says, "In memory of our sacred children" on the top, and there are places for names to be inscribed. And it is a really fascinating approach to helping people memorialize the death of a loved one, and also, reimagining what cemeteries can do. One of the things that we've spoken about before, especially in American Cemetery, is there are sometimes when, funeral directors might be loath to accept, a lost pregnancy that is a very early term lost pregnancy that doesn't require, let's say, or a burial, or doesn't practically produce, I guess, any cremated remains that are able to be, kind of collected. And rethinking that whole approach, that the loss is what is of people's concern, not so much the literal body. And this is, I think, a splendid way for a cemetery to offer this kind of memorialization for lost pregnancies that doesn't require the purchase of a plot, that doesn't require the use of the scattering garden. So take a look at the story. I think it's something that could be easily copied and may be worth copying. And if you are a funeral home or a cemetery that's already doing this, reach out to me and let me know how it's going for you. But we'll have a link to that story in the show notes. And that will do it for this week. In case you missed, it is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. Please subscribe wherever you're listening now, and check out the show notes if you can. There's not just a link to all of the stories. There's also general links to Kates-Boylston.com, where you can find all sorts of great stories involving funeral service. We are the publishers of American Funeral Director and of American Cemetery and Cremation. And as a result, if you're interested at all in death care, we have scads of things for you to read and participate in at Kates-Boylston.com. We also put on events. We've got one coming up on April 1st. There is still time if you're going to Pittsburgh. If you'd like to go to Pittsburgh, there is still time to join us on April 1st. But we have a ton of other events coming up. We have live events, we have virtual events, and we have webinars. Kates-Boylston.com can be like a central hub for all sorts of information and, professional development and insights into ways that other people are running their businesses that might be helpful to you. So check it out, Kates-Boylston.com, and I will check in with you next time.